want to thank you all for being here for our final issue of this series that Kat has so kindly introduced the last three speakers. So we have video up on our Facebook for the last three topics, and it will all be up on our YouTube page as well. So if you missed any of the others, please go there and check them out. It's specifically for disaster relief and disaster preparation. So the first speaker was, and I'm blanking on the first speaker already. Kat, who was our first speaker?
Eric Nankermas
From
FEMA.
Right, from FEMA. And then we had a representative, Yvonne, from the Attorney General's office, who spoke about avoiding consumer scams during and before disasters. And then last week we had our insurance advocate. And this week we have Kathy Lucrezzi, who's going to be presenting on how you can prepare yourself as either a tenant or a homeowner prior to a disaster. And Kathy has been, I just asked her before this to confirm, and she's been practicing housing law since 1930. No, I am so sorry. Not 1937, 1985. I don't know where 1937 came from. 1985. 37 years is what I was going to say, not 1937. So sorry for that. But Kathy is our resident expert, and I know you're going to enjoy her presentation. So Kathy, I'm going to turn my camera off and leave it to you.
Thank you so much. As I creep up to I'm almost 100 years old, so you got to bear with me here. Anyway, good afternoon, or yes, good afternoon, everybody. As Carl said, I'm Kathy Lucrezzi. I'm a supervising attorney here at Legal Aid Service of Collier County. And I have proudly been serving people in the housing area since I graduated from law school in 1938, so, whatever. My focus today is on some very practical things to do leading up to a disaster and what to consider after a disaster happens. And it only occurred to me this morning that I could have included some special effects to, create like a hurricane, earthquake, whatever. That's our disaster. So that's my special effects for the day. What I'm focusing on is the before and the after. I'm not going to try to cover the earlier topics that Carol mentioned. They are available. I have on the screen here that they're available on YouTube, but they're also they're really on our Facebook page, and they're wonderful to watch. They're very valuable. I think you would enjoy reading those, or not reading, excuse me, watching those particular sessions. If you go to the YouTube channel for Legal Aid Service of Collier County, you'll also see a lot of other subjects that we have covered over the years in these lunchtime seminars. But for today, I'm focusing on tenants and homeowners and the very practical things that everybody should be doing now and immediately after the disaster. First, what I mean by before, let's do this now. Don't wait for the hurricane warning to be made or the hurricane watch to be issued. You want to do these things right now. And I'm sure you've heard this, if you've sat through any kind of hurricane preparedness lecture, you've heard, get prepared, get prepared, get prepared. And it cannot be said enough. You already know that you need to get water and food and make sure you have your medicines, all that sort of stuff. I'm telling you that you should also check your documents. And by documents, I mean, is your name on the deed to your home? Do you have a copy of your lease? Do you have the title to your car and to your mobile home? you want to have these things, and I see a typo there, be paid. I don't know what that's from, but you need these documents because after the disaster, you will want to apply for FEMA or other forms of assistance. And those agencies will want to see that you have a legitimate claim for money to make repairs to the home, for money to pay for housing or for relocation. And key to that is having proof of what you already know to be. So we see lots of people that say, yeah, I own my house. I've lived there all my life. I own my house. But when you look at the deed, it's got the name of their grandmother, and nobody's ever changed it over the years, despite grandma being deceased for 10, 20 years. Or it's a house that somebody gave to them, their brother gave it to them, and they just didn't do the deed properly, and so the person's name is not on it. If you don't have proof that you own the property, you're going to have a hard time convincing FEMA or some other agency that they should be giving you money to fix up the house. You want to check this out right now. Don't wait for the hurricane, because sometimes getting this all straightened out takes some time. And when a disaster happens, of course, and you want repairs, you don't want to be waiting a couple of months while a court decides how the deed is going to be rewritten, or until you track down who has to sign off on various things. Check your papers now. If you consider yourself the owner of the house and your name is not on that deed, find out why, see if it can be fixed. Do it now. Get a copy of your lease. I can't tell you the number of times tenants have said, oh, it's just a standard lease. I don't have it. I don't know where it is. It's just a standard lease. And I'm here to tell you, there is no such thing as a standard lease. Everybody's lease is different. And you want to have a complete copy of it. Don't wait for the disaster. And then, the day after the hurricane, you go to the management office and say, hey, I want a copy of my lease. They have suffered through the disaster too. They might not have it available or whatever. And this is true even if there wasn't a disaster on the horizon, you want to have a copy of your lease. It's going to have your name. It's going to show that you are legitimately a tenant at that particular property. And everything I'm saying about having the paperwork to show that you are the owner or the holder of that particular piece of property goes or applies to mobile homes and to the car that you drive. Again, you can't tell you the number of people we see that have a mobile home, have lived in the mobile home for a number of years, have made improvements to the mobile home, but they don't have a title to it. Or the title or the person that sold it to them is long gone, disappeared, can't create a transfer of title. These are all things that's in your best interest to take care of right now. And actually that's true whether there's a disaster coming or not. You want to be sure that you've got documents that show you are entitled to make the repairs or to demand access to the property, that sort of thing. Let's talk about rent and mortgage payments. There's a terrible misconception that when there's a disaster, that rent no longer has to be paid, or that your mortgage payments don't have to be paid. Not so. So before a disaster happens, if you're a tenant, you want to gather your rent receipts so that you have proof of what you paid. So the landlord can't say, oh, you owe me, 2 months back rent, when really you're paid up to date. You want to keep your receipts. And again, this is true whether there's a disaster coming or not, but especially if there's a disaster coming. If you're a homeowner, you want to gather proof of your mortgage payments. Keep in mind that sometimes a disaster affects a bank and their record keeping and their whether they're open or not. So if you're thinking, well, I pay my mortgage you know, from my bank account, and I can just get a copy of my bank statement. When a disaster hits, maybe you can't get that right away. Maybe you have to wait a while. Maybe the internet is down and you can't just download it then. I mean, you want to have it ready. So before the disaster comes, you want to have a system of keeping track of your accounts and what you've paid towards your mortgage. Oop. There we go, photos. This is what you want to do beforehand. You want to take pictures of your place, the outside, the inside, personal property. The reason you do this is because if after the disaster, you want to make a claim on any of the property, you'll have proof of what it was that you had and what condition it was in. For instance, if you look at the screen, there's a great big widescreen TV and whatnot. Having a picture of that when it's in good condition and it's in your home is a great way if later on it's been destroyed and you can say, look, I had a, you know, whatever, an RCA 500-foot screen or whatever. You've got a picture of it that is proof that it existed, that it was in good condition. The outside of the property, even if you're a tenant, you want to take a picture of the outside so that you can demonstrate that the damage to the door was something that occurred because of the hurricane, not because of any misuse by the tenant. So take pictures. And I added the advice there about avoid clutter. And that's because if you ever have to use these pictures as evidence of your claim or what you're seeking, you want to present you and your home in the best light possible. And that means take the pictures when the place is looking good. You don't want to take a picture and maybe later show it as evidence and you've got all the dirty laundry in the corner and all the kids' toys all strewn about. You want to take it when it's looking good. Later on, if you have to use it, it's to your advantage to have the pictures look as good as it could be. Also, before a disaster strikes, come up with a plan about how you're going to communicate with friends and family. It's very common in any kind of disaster, whether natural or you know, world events or whatever, that you want to get a hold of your family. You want to know if they're okay, or B, you want them to know that everything is all right, you're safe, and all that sort of thing. So think about right now, how are you going to do that? Because keep in mind that in a disaster, it's very common for phone lines to be congested, power to be down, so you can't recharge your phone very easily. And you don't want to be on the phone all the time. You have very important things to do after the disaster. Your phone is so important that you do not want to be making 10 phone calls to tell everybody in your family that you're okay. Set up a system where, by phone tree, it's a system where you call one person and that person calls the other. So in my family, I'll call my sister Joanne. I'll say, hey, I'm fine, everything's good, we made it through okay. And then she will call my brothers and you know, other assorted relatives, so that instead of me making 10 phone calls, I make one. And I stay on point, because remember, that phone battery, once it goes down, you might not have an easy time recharging. Keep in mind too that a lot of social media have ways to let people know you're fine. They check in. When there were various wildfires out in Colorado, a friend of mine checked in through Facebook to say, Marie is okay. And that was great. You know, she didn't have to make a whole bunch of phone calls or send out a whole bunch of texts or anything like that. One-stop shop kind of thing. And she was able to communicate to her friends and family that she was okay. And then I put on there to be phone smart. And this is a recommendation that comes from the federal government, the FCC. And by phone smart, they mean consider that power of the phone to be very precious. So in a disaster, you want to be sure that you're not streaming, the latest YouTube videos of kittens and dogs and puppies and stuff. Your kids might want to play games on it. No. That phone is a lifeline for a whole bunch of things, and you need to conserve the battery because recharging the battery is not going to be as easy as we're used to. So be phone smart. In preparation for a disaster, if you have a means of getting an extra battery or extra charger that can be like a backup, that's excellent to have on hand. Now we get to the after part. So after the terrible disaster, whatever it might be, probably the first thing that is going to occur to you is that you need to get repairs made. We get back to the photos. You did the before photos, now you're going to do the after photos. As you take the photos, you definitely want to be sure to show the extent of the damage, and you want to make a note of when the photo was taken. If you're using your phone, the phone will automatically keep a record of when you have taken the picture. But if that's not something that is in your arsenal of things, then make a note of when you're taking the pictures. The other thing about repairs is keep in mind there's a big demand for repairs right after a disaster. If you've been through any of the Florida hurricanes and you needed a roof fixed, you know that roofers were incredibly popular and hard to get a hold of and hard to schedule because there was such a great demand for them. So a lot of people will hire folks, they have a handyman friend and he'll come over and he will repair the door, or they'll go to a hardware store and buy the paneling that needs to be replaced in the garage or whatever. If you do these things, you want to be sure to keep receipts and statements of account, that sort of thing. In one case, I know that we helped a family that after a hurricane, they were faced with a whole lot of repairs to be done. They didn't have much money, and so they were hiring friends to kind of do some work for them. They were buying some replacement things, kind of used, some paneling that a guy down the street had left over and all that sort of stuff. All of that's fine, but they had no record of it. And so when they went to FEMA and said, we want to get some money to cover these costs, and FEMA said, well, show us the receipts. And there were none. The best that the family could do was come up with a list of, well, I think I paid, Frank $50 to clean the gutters or whatever. And I bought a fan to dry out the house. I bought that from some guy down the street at a yard sale. That's not good enough. You want to keep a very careful record of what you're spending in case you have to ask for reimbursement from your insurance or from FEMA or from anybody else. It is not adequate to just rely on your memory. So keep a record. Now we get down to some money issues with rent. As I mentioned very briefly before, rent does not stop just because there's a disaster. Rent still becomes due, which is not logical, I know, but it is what it is. So if the hurricane happens on July 30th, your August 1 rent is due August 1. The exception is to check your lease, okay? Leases, a written lease will sometimes have a clause in it that says, in the event of a disaster, this, and this will happen. And often those clauses will say that there's an abatement or a reduction in rent for the period that it is in disrepair. Or it could say that if the place is so damaged that repair would be impracticable, perhaps the landlord has the right to end the tenancy, or the tenant has the right to end the tenancy. But it's so important that you read the lease. And as I said before, no such thing as a standard lease. Your lease is what counts. And remember in the before section that you should have a copy of your lease. This is one of the reasons. Because if you come to see me to see whether you can force the landlord to make repairs after the hurricane, I'm going to say, well, let me see your lease. Okay. If the place is very damaged, excuse me, where the damage affects habitability, the ability to live in the place, you may have the right to withhold the rent, future rent, from the landlord. It doesn't forgive past rent, but there is a mechanism in Florida law that allows a tenant to withhold rent to force the landlord to make repairs. This is a very dicey area of the statute. And so if you're thinking of doing this, you want to definitely get some legal advice before you do it, okay? Because whether it's done correctly or not will sometimes determine whether you end up getting evicted because you withheld the rent. And I don't have it on here, but in a related, or on a related point, there is no such thing in Florida law as repair and deduct. So if after the disaster, you have paid to get the door fixed, replace the air conditioner, and you think, well, I'll just keep that money back from the next rent that comes due. You have no right in Florida law to do that. You might have a right to make the claim for it against the landlord and sue him to get the money, but you have no right to deduct it from the rent. So keep that in mind, that if you're paying something for repairs, maybe you can sue the landlord to get reimbursed for it, but you can't kind of do it on your own. You can't do a self-help deduction from the rent. I would recommend too that if you are in a situation where your landlord says, look, I have 4 other properties, everything has damage. If you do the repair to the carport and to the door and to the back windows, I will forgive I will forgive $1,000 worth of the rent. If you do something like that, terrific, but get it in writing. Get it in writing, because although an oral agreement is enforceable, as they say, it's only as good as the paper it's not written on. So those kind of oral agreements, they can be great. They're great compromises, but you want to get it in writing so that you protect yourself if later on the landlord forgets that he said he was going to forgive $1,000. Okay, so rent, judges always look at the lease to see what you owe for rent. And before you skip paying the rent, you want to be sure that both you and the landlord are in agreement that that's what you're going to do, or you get legal advice on how to do it. Mortgage payments, in a similar vein, they are not automatically suspended just because there's a disaster. Your mortgage payment still becomes due. So if you usually make your mortgage payment on the 1st of the month, we have a terrible hurricane on July 30th, your August 1 mortgage payment is still due August 1. Now, it's not automatically suspended or delayed, but often mortgage companies or servicers will work with you to deal with the situation. You may remember that after some of the hurricanes, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, some other servicers basically said, look, we're not going to be looking for, we won't hassle you for your mortgage payment for the next 3 months, and you'll just resume them on the 4th month. And there's variations on that. Sometimes they'll say, well, okay, your payment's still due, but we won't charge you any late fees until, you know, a couple months go by. The bottom line to all of that is you want to talk to your servicer if you're going to have trouble making your mortgage payments. So in my hypothetical that we have the hurricane July 30th, your payments due August 1, call the servicer as soon as you can and say, look, I can't make my August 1 payment because the house has been damaged. I need to get to the insurance company. I need to, I need to spend the money on a motel for a few nights, whatever. And they often will work with you. Occasionally, the government will step in and say, there'll be a forbearance on mortgage foreclosures, meaning that, they're going to ask the servicers not to start foreclosures for a while because of financial crises. That might happen, but the key to all of this is you contact your servicer, tell them what your situation is, and see what they can do to help you out. Do it soon. Don't wait until you're 3 months behind and then try to do it. It's better to do it sooner rather than later. Now let's talk about some dangers. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about some of this because it was so ably covered by one of the earlier sessions on fraud and scams. But one of the terrible things about disasters, and there's obviously a lot, but one of the terrible things is that it causes a flurry of additional disasters as the bad guys come out of the woodwork. Sometimes they will go door to door, knocking on the door saying, hey, I see you need some roof repairs. I can do it for, a couple $100. You gotta be careful about anybody that's going door to door selling home repairs. Remember I said, after the hurricanes, roofers are in great demand. They don't have to go door to door looking for business. So if somebody's going door to door looking for business, you gotta wonder why. Maybe they're not licensed. Maybe they're not very good. Maybe they don't do any work, whatever. If they have a contract they want you to sign, you want to read it before you sign it. I could say this a dozen times. You want to read it before you sign it. Read it before you sign it. And I bet you we don't do it. Because, and it's not just you, it's me too. You get those contracts and they say, here, you just need to sign here, and you trust the guy, so you sign off. And before you know it, you got to lean on your house for some really crappy repairs. You want to read what you sign. It's to your benefit. And if that means that you say, can you leave this paper with me so I can read it and then I'll get back to you? And they say, no, you got to decide right now. Then just say, then my decision is no. Because somebody who doesn't want to give you time to read the contract does not deserve your business, period. If you get a phone call from some company that says, we can help you out. We can, give you a grant of $5,000, do whatever repairs you need. And I'm associated with, blah, blah, blah of the state government. Just give me your social security number and we can process the paperwork. Hang up that phone. Nobody is going to ask you, no government agency is going to ask you for your social security number over the phone. No government agency or social service organization is going to ask you for your social security number or your account numbers at your bank or anything like that. If they ask for it, hang up the phone. They are not legit. They are not somebody you can trust. They are after your money or your identification. Hang up the phone. And report them. Report them to the sheriff's department, to the attorney general's office. Report the crimes that happen, because if they're targeting you, they're targeting lots of other people too. And they do it because they're successful at it. They are successful at getting people to give them money, or to give them the information that lets them get money out of your account. One of the other risky things that have happened that we've seen here at our legal aid office are some employment scams. We've seen situations where after a disaster, a guy will drive by some folks and say, hey, do you want to earn some money doing repairs? And the guys say, yep, we'll do it. And the guy in the car says, okay, well, I'll pay you $30 a day to do this, this, and this. And then people get in the car, they go, they do the work, and at the end of the week, they don't get a paycheck. The guy just disappears. So if you're going to get hired by somebody to do some temporary work, or I guess they call it like a gig kind of thing, you're going to do just some quick repairs, the guy is hiring you, get the name of the person, the name of the company. He will ask, the person who's hiring you will ask you for your social security number or your TIN number. And if those things aren't happening, he's not legit. And you will have a very great risk of not getting paid for the work you do. You can sue him for what you're owed, but if you don't know his name, it's going to be doomed. If you think, well, the guy who hired me was named John, that's all I know, you're not going to get paid. You're not going to see any money out of it. So let me just recap some of the highlights here. Before the disaster, you want to make sure you've got paperwork all lined up. You want to make sure your name is on your deed, that you have a copy of your lease, depending, obviously whether you're a homeowner or a tenant. You want to have the title to your car, or at least a copy of it. It doesn't have to be the original. You want to have a copy of the title to your mobile home or RV, whatever. All of these are important possessions and assets that you have that you want to have. You want to be able to produce proof that they're really yours. You want to have some way of accessing your bank account records. And if that means downloading them onto a thumb drive or something like that, then do it so you have it at the ready. Don't count on the bank being able to snap to it very quickly after a disaster. You want to have a copy of all your rent receipts so you have proof of what your standing is with the landlord. When you go for repairs, if you're paying out of pocket, whether for the labor or for the materials, you want to be sure that you're getting receipts and statements and that you're keeping a good record of what you're spending. If you worked out a deal with the landlord about exchanging some of your labor for rent, you want to get that into writing so that you're protected if later on the landlord happens to forget that he had this agreement with you. You want to set up a system where you know how you're going to communicate with friends and family after a disaster to let them know that you're okay. Because you recognize that your telephone is very important, and you don't want to be spending a lot of time talking to a lot of people when you might have to run for a few days on a single charge. You want to be sure that you deal with rent and mortgage payments promptly. If you have to get some help, you want to talk to the people to talk to the servicer in the mortgage scenario, and know that they might be able to work with you to make it a little less terrible to meet your mortgage payments. For tenants, you want to be sure that you read the lease to see what your liability and rights are in the event that a disaster destroys the premises altogether. And lastly, you want to be careful that you protect your money and yourself, or your identification, self-identification, by being a good consumer, being cautious if somebody is looking for you to give them money or information. There are a lot of great folks out there and agencies and organizations that help after disaster. And at least in terms of legal help, you can always turn to one of the agencies on the phone there. Legal Aid Service of Collier County is committed to serving eligible clients in Collier County. We love what we do, and you're welcome to call that number and see if you're eligible if you need our services. Collier County Bar Lawyer Referral Service, the Florida Bar Lawyer Referral Service do not depend on eligibility. They do charge a fee for a short consultation, and at the very least give you some names of people that can give you legal advice. It's a terrible thing to go through a disaster. It's worse when the disaster lasts for months and months and months because you're dealing with a bunch of legal issues, but you can help reduce what some of that terrible aftermath is by handling the things that you can before the disaster ever helps. And that concludes pretty much everything I had to say. Although if there are any questions, please put them into the chat, or if you wish, you can just message me and I'll be happy to respond as I can. I appreciate everybody's attention. Oh,
Kathy, I do have a question.
yes.
We during the last storm, we saw a number of people who had paid their rent, had a valid lease, but were being evicted because the landlord wanted to house a family member or house themselves. What type of protections do people in that situation have?
It all depends on the lease. If the lease says, in my hypothetical of the July 30th hurricane, if your lease goes until December 31st of 2022, then it doesn't matter that the landlord wants to put one of their relatives into the place. You've got a lease. You've got the right to be there as long as you comply with the lease. The exceptions are if there's something in the lease that says the landlord has the ability to declare that the tenancy is terminated if the place is destroyed, or if there's some other kind of loophole that is already in the lease. But your lease will control. It doesn't matter that the landlord's, dear beloved sister is in need of a roof over her head. If you've got a valid lease, then you've got a valid lease, and you're entitled to be there as long as you comply with the lease. Period.
Okay. Thank you.
And if a landlord were to start an eviction based on something like that, I would hope that the person would contact an attorney and get some legal advice about how to defend that eviction.
Thank you. I see there are a couple of people in chat. Nope. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Like I say, I'll stay on for a little bit in case there's other questions, but you all know how to reach me. I'm at that 775-4555 number. And, if you're a fairly nice person, I will answer your call and answer your question.
Thank you. And we will, when we post this on YouTube, we'll make sure we have the same numbers that Kathy has listed there for Broward County. So for both Legal Aid of Broward County and Coast to Coast.
My apologies to Broward. I apologize. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy. Any questions from anyone? If not, you can come off mic if you want. If not, we will end it here. And thank you, Kathy, for your presentation today.
My pleasure. Thank you.